Sometimes, the silence in a marriage doesn't scream. It just whispers until you can't ignore it anymore. I used to know everything about my husband's day, where he was going, who he was meeting, what he ate for lunch. But somewhere along the way, those little details started slipping through the cracks. It didn't happen all at once. It was a slow drift, like watching a boat inch away from the dock, hardly noticeable until the line goes taut and you realize how far it's floated. Lately, his suitcase stayed by the door more often than not. His calendar was full of meetings in cities that didn't make sense. He kissed my cheek like a habit, called me love like it was a reflex. We weren't fighting. That might have been easier. Instead, we lived beside each other like polite roommates. I worked long hours teaching creative writing at the local college. He was a consultant of some kind, something vague and mobile, always shifting between projects. And still, I loved him. But love doesn't always feel safe when it's wrapped in silence. It was the receipts that started it. One morning, while searching for a pen in the kitchen drawer, I found a crumpled hotel invoice. Not in the city he said he was in. Not even close. He never mentioned it. I stared at the paper for a long time. Didn't say anything. Just folded it back, placed it neatly beside the batteries, and closed the drawer like it hadn't changed everything. Over the next few weeks, more signs surfaced. Missed calls. Half-erased calendar entries. A strange charge from a flower shop in a town I'd never heard of. He still held me at night. Still made me coffee in the morning. But I felt like I was loving someone who was already halfway out the door. And maybe I was. Maybe I'd been doing it for longer than I realized. It's not the lie that hurts. It's the fear that you've already heard the last truth. I started noticing patterns. Or maybe I started looking for them. It's strange how fast your brain rewires itself when you stop feeling safe. Every minute he spent with his phone turned face down felt suspicious. Every new voicemail he didn't play in front of me. Every trip that didn't add up. There was a folded note in his jacket pocket once, scribbled directions, a name I didn't recognize, and a time. It wasn't a love letter, nothing obvious. But it didn't belong. Another day, I saw a flight confirmation come through his email, one he quickly archived before I could glance twice. It wasn't for his supposed destination. It wasn't even for the same coast. I didn't say anything. Not because I was afraid to know, but because I wasn't ready to hear him lie. I tried to distract myself, buried myself in work, gave extra hours to my students, volunteered for weekend workshops. Anything to feel like I still had purpose. Like the rest of my life wasn't fraying at the seams. But the ache was still there. It followed me. In the way he smiled less. In how his hugs felt like punctuation, not conversation. One evening, while he was in the shower, I opened his laptop. I don't know what I was hoping to find. Maybe proof. Maybe relief. Maybe both. Instead, I found a folder labeled M. Inside, photos of an old Victorian house. A quiet garden. Medical receipts. A grocery list written in handwriting that wasn't his or mine. And then, a single photo of him standing on a porch, smiling beside an elderly woman with soft white hair and kind, tired eyes. He looked peaceful, but not with me. I closed the laptop, went into the kitchen, sat down, and waited for him to come out and tell me something. Anything. That might make sense of what I'd just seen. But he didn't. He just dried his hair, kissed my head, and said he'd be out of town again next week. This time, I didn't pretend. This time, I decided to follow him. You brace yourself for betrayal, and life hands you something else entirely. I had my bag packed. Not much, just enough for a night. A change of clothes, a notebook, and the photo I'd printed from his laptop. I'd booked a rental car under a different name. Took a personal day from work. Told myself I'd drive to whatever address I could find linked to that woman, to that town. I didn't know what I'd do when I got there, but I couldn't keep breathing in a house filled with quiet lies. That morning, I stood by the door, keys in hand, trying not to shake. And then the phone rang. His name lit up the screen. I answered with more steel in my voice than I felt. But it wasn't him. It was a nurse. She asked if I was his wife. Said he'd been in a car accident. Not critical, but enough to need observation. He was in a hospital 2 towns over. Not where he said he'd be. Not even close. I drove through 2 hours of snow-lined roads with my heart lodged in my throat. Every terrible possibility chased me the whole way. But none of them prepared me for what I found when I walked into that hospital room. He was awake. Bruised, but breathing. Eyes tired. The kind of tired that no amount of sleep fixes. And beside his bed, the woman from the photo. Her name was Martha. She stood when I walked in, unsure, like she didn't know whether to smile or run. He looked at me with something I couldn't read, shame, maybe, or relief. I was going to tell you, he said, voice hoarse. And I wanted to ask 100 questions. But all I said was, "Who is she?" The woman stepped forward, gently touching his hand. "I'm not who you think," she said softly. "I'm not a mistress. I'm a family." And just like that, the floor shifted. The betrayal I thought I was chasing? It was something else entirely. Some secrets aren't kept out of malice, but out of fear they might break the only thing worth keeping. The hospital room felt too bright, too sterile. But the silence that followed Martha's words was heavier than any curtain could block out. My husband cleared his throat, his voice raw. "I didn't cheat on you," he said. "I swear to you, I didn't. I didn't say anything. Not yet." Martha gently pulled a chair forward and sat beside his bed, as if she'd done it 100 times before. Her hands were folded, steady. "I'm Carl's mother," she said. Carl. The name meant nothing until it did. "I had a son before I met my husband," she continued. "I gave him up for adoption. Years later, he found me. And through him, she looked at my husband. We found each other." The math began to align. Carl was his half-brother. Gone before they ever had a chance to meet his boys. Reconnected just last year, quietly. Carl had died shortly after, a sudden illness. No warning, no time to process. My husband had barely spoken about it, because he hadn't told me at all. "I didn't know how to explain," he said, his eyes searching mine. "I didn't want to burden you with something so complicated. I didn't want to drag you into a grief you never agreed to carry." And there it was. The distance between us, all this time, not made of lies, but of unspoken pain. He'd been mourning a brother he never got to fully know. Spending time with the only connection left, Martha, the woman who had raised Carl, loved him, and now found herself alone in a house full of his memories. My breath caught. I'd been preparing for betrayal. But what I found was something harder, a man trying to carry grief alone. A man who didn't cheat, but hid. Because somewhere deep down, he thought it would protect us. "I didn't tell you," he whispered, "because I thought you'd leave me if I gave you more sadness." I sat beside him, not ready to forgive, but not ready to walk away, either. Because sometimes love isn't about trusting perfectly. It's about choosing to stay while you learn how to. Sometimes what's left behind isn't a burden, it's a bridge. We stayed in town longer than planned. Not because he asked me to, but because I saw how much he needed me to, even if he couldn't say it. Martha invited us to her house a few days after my husband was discharged. It was modest, floral curtains, old books, a kettle that whistled even when it wasn't boiling. The kind of place that felt lived in, but not crowded. His footsteps slowed in the hallway. I followed him into a small room at the back of the house. That's when I saw it. A desk. Stacks of paper. Drawings pinned to the wall. "This was Carl's," Martha said, voice soft. "He was writing a book. A children's story. He didn't finish it." I stepped closer, drawn without meaning to be. The pages were worn but organized, a story about two brothers separated by storms, searching for each other through magical lands. The illustrations were simple, sketched in colored pencil, but full of life. My husband watched me reading, his hand grazing the edge of the desk. "He wanted to publish it," Martha added. "We used to joke about seeing it on shelves. He worked on it every Sunday." And just like that, the grief in the room changed shape. It wasn't a shadow anymore. It was a question. Could we finish what he started? That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from anger. Not from confusion. From possibility. I was a writer. He was a designer. Carl had given us the beginning. Maybe, just maybe, this was how we built something new together. The next morning, over coffee in Martha's kitchen, I said it out loud. "What if we completed the book?" Martha blinked, then nodded, slowly. Her fingers trembled around the mug. My husband didn't speak, but the look in his eyes said everything. This wouldn't undo the pain, but it could give it purpose. Healing doesn't always come from letting go. Sometimes it comes from building something with what's left. We cleared off Carl's desk together, not to erase him, but to make space for him to be finished. I took the manuscript home, printed it, and began annotating. He'd left gaps, character arcs half-formed, an ending that trailed off mid-sentence. But there was magic in his voice, in the rhythm of his storytelling. A blend of sorrow and wonder that felt familiar, like grief dressed as a fairy tale. My husband took over the art. He hadn't drawn in years, not seriously. But now he worked in silence most nights, surrounded by Carl's sketches. He didn't try to outdo his brother's style. He echoed it, built on it, filled in what was missing with his own hand, steady, reverent. Martha joined us each weekend. She brought old journals, photos, even Carl's childhood notes for the story. She read every chapter aloud, her voice fragile at first, then stronger. There were moments when she'd have to stop and collect herself. Moments when we'd sit together in silence and just let the absence breathe. But slowly, something remarkable happened. We stopped saying his book. We started saying the book. By the time spring came, the manuscript was whole. A story of two brothers separated by a storm, reunited by a shared compass, a magical item neither had known they carried. It wasn't subtle. It didn't need to be. It was honest. And when we printed the final draft and held it in our hands, none of us cried. We just smiled. Because some stories don't need to be mourned. They need to be finished. Together. Some stories end in silence. Others in forgiveness. But the best ones, they end in beginning again. The book was published quietly. No big launch party. No glittering lights. Just a small press that believed in the story, in its heart, its softness, its truth. We called it The Compass Between Us. The first copy arrived in the mail in a brown box with no fanfare. We opened it at the kitchen table. Martha ran her hand over the cover, her thumb resting on the illustration of two boys standing side by side under a broken sky. Carl's name was on it. Ours too. Not out of ego, but as a sign that his voice had not ended alone. That night, we read it aloud. All three of us. We took turns with the pages, with the voices. We laughed in the same spots, paused in the same places. And when the final sentence came, the brothers standing hand in hand at the edge of the world, compass glowing between them, no one moved for a long time. There was no more suspicion in our home. No more late-night doubt. Only love. Only presence. Martha moved in a few months later. Just the guest room, she insisted, but it wasn't long before it became hers. Our days found new rhythm. Shared meals. Quiet mornings. Coffee mugs on the porch. The marriage I thought was slipping away? It didn't vanish. It transformed. We learned how to talk again, not just about bills and schedules, but about dreams. About fear. About all the things we hadn't said. And somehow, finishing Carl's book helped us write a new chapter of our own. Not perfect, but real. On weekends, we do readings at libraries and small schools. Sometimes we bring copies to shelters. To children who understand storms. And every time we turn to that last page, I feel something simple and undeniable. This is what love can build, even from grief. Even from suspicion. Even after silence.